this is my own analogy, is to be more of a surgeon versus a butcher, which means at the very beginning, I just had to make sure all the customers are covered. So I spread my time quite thin, but then was able to put some scores on the scoreboard. But then going forward as a phase two is to be much more surgical and understanding who should we go after and who are the new customers within that sector that we had to go after. So that once again was something that I had to work with the data team to really extract that insight.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today, we have Dennis Yu. Dennis is a revenue and strategy leader. Currently, he is the merchant success team lead at Shopify. He's on the advisory board of USC Startup Accelerator, and he is also leading talent and professional development for Asian ERG at Shopify. Today, we'll talk about what business leaders look for in data science projects, how can data scientists collaborate better with business, and his career journey. And if you enjoy the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thanks for having me, Daliana. Very excited for this interview.
Yeah, let's dive in. So can you give us a high-level overview of your career journey?
Sure. I think my career journey is perhaps a little, I would say, unique compared to a lot of people's journey in technology field. So I started my career actually in finance, being that I graduated with econ degree from undergrad. I worked at Merrill Lynch for a little bit. Quickly realized that I didn't want to look at Excel sheets all day. So I decided to pivot my career into retail. Being that I had a little bit of exposure into retail, my family's been in that business since the 80s, from the production side of it, especially from overseas, working with companies like Nike, JCPenney at that time, and Adidas and so on. So I've always had some interest into sportswear, apparel, just apparel category in general. So I want to get into the retail industry and, had a chance to work for a denim company based in Virginia at that time, and they had hired me on as as an entry level sort of sales rep to begin my retail journey, so to speak. Worked there for a couple of years and moved to Virginia, traveled quite a bit all throughout the coast, and moved up my role into more of a sales manager for Western region. And after that, I just missed my home too much, and definitely missed the sunshine weather in LA. So I decided to move back to LA at that time. And afterwards, I actually launched my own sales and marketing agency for about 7 years. And it was quite a bit of a good experience and journey, utilizing my network and knowledge in apparel industry. Built out the agency based in LA, multiple sales reps across the country. After 7 years, as the business kind of went up and down, and we hit the sort of 2013 mark, where the recession hit the retail industry fairly hard. We closed shop and sold off the company, and I joined a couple other corporate companies in the retail field. And at that time, what was interesting was you could really see, there was already e-commerce, so that e-commerce was fairly prevalent at that time, but certainly still wasn't the majority of where the consumer transaction was coming from. It was still the physical retail.
So as I got into the physical part, as I started working for other corporate companies, I noticed some trends, which is the consumers are starting to shop online more and more. And the majority of the consumer spending is still the physical retail, but the growth of it year over year was slowing down quite a bit. So I knew, sort of taking what other people have spoken to, using the quote, that skate to where the puck is going versus where it is. I knew that's, technology and also e-commerce is where I needed to go. So my first role after working on the corporate company was another tech company based in Los Angeles called Demand Media at that time. Right now it's called Leaf Group. And Leaf Group, it's a multi-branded conglomerate company with a few e-commerce companies under its portfolio, mainly in the lifestyle design field. And I was the director of business development there for a website called Society6. And it's a digital marketplace for designers, illustrators, And so that was my first partnership, revenue driving role in the technology
okay,
field.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really exciting, sort of just being able to learn and working with a great team. It was a startup field, even though it was owned by a bigger company that's publicly traded. So we kind of had the, I would just say, the benefit of having the resources of being under a public traded company, but running like a startup with some autonomy.
Yeah.
And after that, I moved up to another company called Art.com, which is very similar to what Society6 and also Lead Group was building there, except Art.com's been around for a while. I would say I believe it actually started around the time that Amazon also started. But the interesting part of Art.com is that not many people knew about that website. They may know the URL since it's very easy to remember, but it's definitely one of the world's largest digital marketplaces for art products. Third parties and also direct sellers are also on the website. So I was helping the GM for the B2B side of it for strategy and also partnership development as well. After Art.com sold to Walmart at that time, I decided to take a little break, I would say, from technology. And I went to USC to manage the USC Marshall Supply Chain Program / Center for about 2 years. USC being my alma mater, it's always been a place that I have a special place in my heart. It's a great place. It really got me a chance to, mentor, advise the students as well, and really looking at what education is heading towards in the next phase. So I did that for about 2 years, a great experience, and just got the itch again to go into technology or startup. And so just early on this year, I'm sorry, not this year. Now I'm still in 2021 mentality, but early in 2021, I joined Shopify. And, I am currently the merchant success team lead in the West Coast, helping merchants grow their businesses on an e-commerce platform.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I love that you have such a rich experience in e-commerce. So as a data scientist, naturally, I want to ask, so in the e-commerce space, usually what type of metrics do you look at when you're thinking about growing your business?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think depending on the roles and depending on what you're trying to achieve, there's definitely some basic table stake metrics that we measure, whether that's GMV, whether that's on the revenue level, GMV.
What's GMV? Could you explain to our listeners?
Absolutely, right. It's gross merchandise value, and that's fairly common in the e-commerce world to measure the overall revenue. From a company, from an e-commerce retailer. So the GMV value, AOV, which stands for average order value, LTV, long-term value of the customer, conversion rate, which is once again when the customer goes on the website, goes on e-commerce retailer's website, how many of them actually make the transaction at the end of the day. We have metrics such as abandoned cart, and which is how many customers actually go on the website and don't transact and check out at the end of the day. So I think those are some of the high levels of the metrics we look into. But from a more role specific standpoint, for example, I was in partnership and sales. So a lot of times your metrics are, how many, the pipeline, essentially, the sales pipeline type of metrics. So that includes, how many prospects on the qualifying phase, prospecting phase, how many wins and losses from the prospects, and how long does it take to close certain deals, to something even more tactical, as in how many customers are we reaching out to, or how many partners are we reaching out to on a day-to-day basis or month-to-month basis.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And so those are a lot of metrics to look at. And for you, when you help a business grow or growing your own e-commerce business, what is the first thing you want to look at?
I think the easiest thing, and where a lot of people go to, which is, it doesn't tell the whole story, but it's definitely a good start, is the GMV level. Yeah. Which is gross merchandise value, like I mentioned. It really tells you, at least the scale, the size of your partner or the e-commerce retailer that you're operating on. I would say that's the first, and then you try to figure out other data points to kind of figure out the story and the insights of that partner.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious, do you have any examples? For example, if GMV is high and cart abandon rate is also, could they both be high? And if you see those metrics are both high, does it tell you any story?
Right. So I think at the higher percentage wise, you can always make a case that the higher GMV rate, the abandoned cart rate specifically wouldn't be correlating to the GMV rate. I would say, a lot of times you would say, and it also depends on the category as well. So let's take apparel as a category. So apparel category conversion rate usually roams anywhere between 2 to 3%. And that's considered just average, looking at digital marketing, looking at different types of acquisition strategy, SEO, 2 to 3%. That's pretty average. So you can use that as a benchmarking tool for any sort of apparel e-commerce retailer. And then looking at the GMV level. So the GMV could come from the e-commerce, and perhaps they also have other types of partnerships, from affiliate marketing to some of the companies that actually have other distribution channels, whether it's wholesale distribution, that could roll out to GMV, making sure that it's as clean as possible, that it doesn't include any other transactions out of the digital online distribution. So that's one way to look at it, like in terms of the industry benchmark per category, and you can dig into per size of the what we call GMV band, of the type of retailer or the entity that you're looking into. So that would give you at least one general high level data point to kind of go by.
Yeah, I think having the idea of comparing things to industry benchmark is very important, especially when you're just starting to grow a business. You don't know how you are doing, right? So if I'm growing a new category that I don't know the benchmark, I don't know how my competitors are doing, what are some other things I can look at?
So I think industry, like you mentioned, industry benchmark is very important, but there's also other types of metrics that people usually kind of go into in terms of, digital marketing on Facebook, and also, keywords advertising or Google AdWords. What's the average sort of conversion, or what's the average number when it comes to revenue attribution into a category of the type of retailer that that you are working with. So that's one way to click down into something a little bit more specific tactically on the marketing strategy.
And have you used both Facebook and Google AdWords for marketing?
The companies that I work for, they do. Usually those companies have specific departments and also professionals that deal with digital marketing. They obviously manage that on a day-to-day basis, as well as a SEO team that kind of manage that task. But I work more so on the sales and business development side of it, which is really pipeline generation, but also understanding how we can collaborate in terms of different initiatives that they're doing on the marketing side of it.
Got it. And from the business development perspective, what are some metrics you're looking at? I think previously you mentioned something like lead generation, partnership. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So a lot of times at sales and business development, depending on the organization you work with, some organizations have business development as a strict partnership, sort of foundational partnership type of, a format. Some organizations, business development is the same as the sales. And I've been in sort of the both arena before, which business development is more kind of like a sales motion. So in those types of contexts and that type of situation, I think the very sort of, once again, table stake type of, metrics that you're looking into is the revenue at the end of the day. Like, how much revenue are you driving from these partners? And how much margins are you are you actually creating from these partners coming into the pipeline? And on the day-to-day basis or a month-to-month basis, you looking at the pipeline generation, how many leads are being generated for us to reach out to on the month-to-month basis, and how many are going through different phases, or how many different cycles within that sales cycle overall, whether it's prospecting, whether it's evaluating, assessing, whether that prospect is the right partner for us, to closing, to also the ones that are out of the pipeline and losing that deal. So that gives us a good understanding from an overall level in terms of revenue to what are we doing to attribute to that revenue, to the day-to-day, which is more tactical, as I mentioned, how many calls or how many engagement points do you have with customers and prospects.
So data scientists, as a data scientist, we work a lot with marketing and sales. A lot of times it's supporting their business function, but I think it's going to be very helpful if data scientists actually understand the sales cycle, how marketing works, so we can solve the business problem better. And for me, I actually haven't done a lot of trainings in sales. And I think it would be really interesting for the audience if you could give us a little bit sales masterclass. Can you tell us how is the cycle you just mentioned in sales work? What are the important steps in sales?
Yeah.
And partnership. Yeah.
Right. So I think from a sales cycle perspective, I think there's definitely some basics across all industries, whether it's a SaaS company that's selling into, different e-commerce companies, or e-commerce companies that in itself are creating any sort of partnership outside. So I'll give you an example. There's Mint. There's a website called mint.com. They are within the same type of design space that Society6 and a couple other digital marketing digital marketplaces are. But they also, not only do they sell direct consumer at the end of the day, which they're using marketing, but they also sell to other wholesale, other B2B type of motion. So that's also sales cycle. But so it really depends on, I guess the nuance really depends on who you're selling to, what industry, what distribution. But I think overall, when it comes to sales cycle wise, like I mentioned, you do have the first aspect of it, which is prospecting different, a lot of times from a SaaS standpoint, you have the SDR, sales development reps that are doing the prospecting. And that's just a numbers game. So how many how many calls can you make a day, a week, a month? And once everything's being sourced, we go into qualifying. And so when you get to the account executive level, that take over that sort of handoff the motion, understanding certain leads are actually what we call warm, or, have some potential to turn to essentially convert into a real customer. The account executive go into the presentation discovery mode, and also doing any sort of information and gathering. And after that, we may have some of the reps that are doing the demo and understanding, getting the right stakeholders on the call, whether it's the people that are actually using the product or the people that are buying the product, and who the internal champions are. So once again, when we talk about from a SaaS model, you have the SMB market, you have the mid market, enterprise market. It really just depends on how big. The bigger the organizations are, the more stakeholders and the longer sales cycle that's going to be to get that deal closed. So that's and then after that, it's really just it's the time. It depends on how the deal is going, and that goes into either you close the deal or you lose the deal. But as we always say, the no is never a no. It just means it's not the right time.
Yeah. I love that. So no, it's not a no. It's not the right time. Do you have a number of follow-ups you generally do? Do you have any rules, like a kind of a decision tree, the actions you want to take after that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the nuance really comes down to, once again, the organization and also the sales leaders themselves in terms of how they look at the no is not a no, whether there's a bucket of clients, and understanding the reasons why that it's not the right time, it's not the right fit at this point, and also to understand, create a different strategy. Whether that's an automated strategy, always, well, number one, you always keep the leads, obviously, and you always have automated strategy from marketing standpoint to always keep them informed on the new products, always inform them on what's going on with the companies, because you just never know what things are gonna happen. But I think it's also very important on the sales side of it, and this is the difference between sales and marketing, is that the sales side of it is very human centric. Even as a technology company, the reason why a lot of SaaS companies, other companies have a big sales organization is the people-to-people element is still a big part of the sales cycle, especially with the bigger enterprise type of clients. Yeah. So we always make sure that that's also being taken into consideration. Like there's a bucket or there's a category of clients when it's not the right fit. We understand why, and we understand what would be the next best action step.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think I just learned that sales and marketing, although we often talk about that together, but they're very different, especially in the digital era. A lot of marketing are done online through, a lot of automation, emails, Facebook, Google campaigns. But sales, you still pick up the phone and call people.
Right, absolutely. And now obviously we have used Zoom so heavily, and we use other sort of video platforms. But I think the way that you can see the difference between marketing and sales, especially in SaaS type of environment, that marketing is, when it comes to outbound marketing, it's very much lead generation. And we work hand in hand, marketing and sales, because without marketing, we wouldn't be able to get enough sales leads coming in to help the SDRs. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the sales process, I know you mentioned for, SaaS product or different type of products, different. Maybe just use example of your previous company during the sales cycle. Do you work with data scientists or analysts in the process?
Yeah, I did. So I'll give an example. When I was a lead group, and I was one of the earlier business development role person, so to speak, to kind of build out that program. So I really had to build it from scratch, and I think that was a good learning experience, because from a data standpoint, we really didn't get much support because it's a brand new organization. So at that point, we had an established base of partners who we were distributing the products to. We had some of the data that's embedded in terms of revenue, in terms of where the customers are, where they're based, month to growth, year to year growth, as well as products that have purchased. But that's pretty much the understanding of it. The next phase, when I stepped in, I inherited a sort of baseline revenue, and the first thing I had to do is, once again, like we always say, look for that low hanging fruit, to put some scores on the scoreboard, right? So I was able to generate and really enhance or increase that existing revenue, double the amount the first year, and that was really the goal. At that point, I start working with data team to understand regionally where the customers are, products wise, what's working and what's not working, and from margin standpoint, because once again, like I mentioned, I was in an interesting situation where the company was a publicly traded company, but we're a startup as well. So I was in an interesting situation where I had to look at the top line, but I also have to worry about the bottom line, because once again, right, the investors, they do care about both. So I needed to look at the margins as well, like what kind of product is creating the most margins out of what region and which customer and which customer type. So that actually was quite a bit of exercise. And the way I work with data, I think very beginning was asking them, hey, can you help me and put together this data sort of scorecard at the beginning and dashboard so I can really analyze it. And so they were able to do so. As we move forward, I was able to build a team and be a more sort of what I would call, this is my own analogy, is to be more of a surgeon versus a butcher, which means at the very beginning, I just had to make sure all the customers are covered. So I spread my time quite thin, but then was able to put some scores on the scoreboard. But then going
Yeah.
forward as a phase two is to be much more surgical and understanding who should we go after and who are the new customers within that sector that we had to go after. So that once again was something that I had to work with the data team to really extract that insight.
Yeah, that's very cool. Thank you for walking us through your thought process. So if I understand it correctly, when you have a very big kind of overarching goal, you break it down the goal by looking at different regions, different type of product types, and then find the low hanging fruit. Maybe you can double down on something that works really well. And for the things that don't work well, maybe you want to improve that or make decision, or maybe you want to cut it, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely one. So that's one aspect of it. I think as I was building that organization up and really building the revenue up, the other aspect that I would have to look at to match was what kind of resources do we have? You know, and I think for all the organizations and that they will agree, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where somebody will say, we have unlimited amount of resources, just do whatever you want. So I think that's where that ruthless prioritization really comes in. Yeah. And I think that's where data is really important, because data tells a story. And I always say data is a great proxy and also conversation starter, obviously, but there's insight that needs to be extracted, but it's a good way for us to start to understand where should we focus. And where should we focus, matching up what kind of resources can support those types of focuses that we select to go forward with. Yeah.
And definitely want to talk more about storytelling with data. So you mentioned data can help you identify resources from the perspective of sales. What are some other resources that helps you making decisions?
I think in terms of decision making on, the opportunities from my past experiences has always been the resources can come from, your capital resource, which is how much budget do you have, for the initiatives for the next quarter, next year or so. There's also the human capital resource, like how many team members do you have, and also cross-functionally, what kind of support do you have as well. So I think that's more so from a cost standpoint. What kind of resources can you identify really support the vision or the path that you mapped out from the data standpoint as you analyze the data, like which sort of greenfield market do you want to go after?
Yeah. And for example, if you're analyzing a greenfield market, what type of questions do you ask, and what type of data do you need from the data team?
So from data standpoint, let's just provide one example. Let's just say, a few of the partners when I'm working at Society6, they're actually department stores. So the question is, we're an e-commerce company. Do we want to select outside channels as sort of physical retail as part of a channel partners? And knowing that, we're going to need additional resources outside of our digital marketing to support that cost and also the cost that comes with it. So from a data standpoint, we need to understand, okay, well, have we sold to any of the department stores as partners before? And what kind of products actually sold through? And a lot of department stores, they have that data, and they usually would share that with you. So you can aggregate that data to understand what product types, what's the sell-through. The sell-through in retail, essentially, it's for merchandisers of retail, they run a sell-through number on a weekly basis to see what percentage of the inventory do they sell through for that product. So you can gain that information as part of your data points as well. And also from a regional standpoint, because a lot of department stores, they're nationwide, to understand what region, what regions is selling what products well. And a lot of times you can also utilize the information for your own direct consumer website as well, right? To understand, to see what customer, what demographic is buying your product at what region, and can you actually start to localize some of the offerings? So that's another interesting point. But to kind of go back again, so I think department store is one of those, sort of an interesting use case that you can use data to understand where they are. And on the resource side of it, like I mentioned, selling to big department stores, a lot of times it sounds really great. Definitely there's a high sort of from branding standpoint, there's more visibility for the company, but from also the upside of potential income or revenue generation, it could be really lucrative. But at the same time, there's always other costs that department stores ask from the vendors, whether it's returns, guaranteed returns, or guaranteed margins. A lot of times when we look at apparel items, on average, maybe 50 to 60%, gross margin is pretty fair or usual. But, in a department store, they may ask you for, 70% margin. That means all that the additional 10 to 15% margin has to come out of the vendor's own market, like your own pocket, essentially. So that calculation has to be added in to see, well, with that kind of upfront investment, is it worth it for the long run? So I think any time when you're a business leader or you're a sales leader, when you're trying to create a greenfield, as you mentioned, inevitably you're going to have to create some kind of pitch or proposal to your upper management or other stakeholders. So that's the part that you need to add in, as part of the proposals to create, some kind of forecast number to support your strategy.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so if it's a greenfield, I know that you can analyze some previous products sold in the store or similar product. How do you make the forecast?
The forecast, it's now that's an art. No, it's so much of science. I think like any other kind of forecast, you really want to take in as many variables as you could. And this is the part that you can also look at. So let's just give an example. If you were to sell into a department store like Nordstrom, which is more of what I call lifestyle boutique department stores, and they have decided to carry certain products in the areas of West Coast. We also have data on our end as well from the direct consumer part of it to understand what kind of products sell well in the West Coast and what percentage of what kind of products sell West Coast. So certainly we can use that as a leverage point to recommend as part of the packages sold to Nordstrom. And with that, we can infer into the forecast of if XYZ amount is being sold to Nordstrom at this time of the year, then this amount could be sold through in a certain month, and here's the revenue generation. It's not perfect, but once again, I think this is where the data comes in that can have a support clause to be. It just has to be rational. It has to be reasonable.
Yeah. And then you previously mentioned you can use the data to tell a story and make decisions. So when you have the data, how do you work with the data scientists to get a story? Do they tell you the story, or you look at the report and figure out on your own? What does the collaboration look like?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely, like you mentioned, it's more of collaboration and partnership versus me. So I think I've seen different situations before where, the business leader will come up with the outcome, and essentially we try to craft the data to kind of back up the solution, back up the support, essentially. I haven't seen as many from the other side where the data team actually sort of leading that conversation and coming out with the outcome. So, but the way I like to work at is when I reach out to the data team is trying to give them the full scope of what I'm trying to look for and what I'm trying to validate, and what I'm also trying to see whether there's gaps into my own validation or assumption. So, give an example once again with the Nordstrom idea was okay, so I forecasted that Nordstrom could be a great partner of ours, and we should, sell XYZ products at a certain amount of time, and this is where the revenue goes. And that's where I go to data team to understand from what we have in terms of the products and also in terms of the regional specialization, what kind of products sell well, at what kind of level, what kind of speed, and what kind of demographic to really validate it. If it's not, then it's something that, I either have to work with the data teams to kind of dig in deeper to see whether my assumption could still possibly be correct, whether there's some other elements that we're not looking at, or I need to go back to my own drawing board and really find out maybe my assumption, my validation is not as correct as it could be.
Yeah, I think that's a great mindset. I think that's probably related to your background in econ, right? You're not going there to say, hey, this is what I want, and then I just want a data point, and I already make that decision. I think you see that as a hypothesis, and you want to see whether data can validate that, and if it doesn't validate that, then you change your strategy or you come out with a different question.
Right. So exactly, I don't think, without that type of collaboration, I think any sort of assumption is perhaps not, it's just not rational. And it has to be that sort of back and forth type of conversation that I found it really helpful versus a one-way conversation.
Yeah. So as a data scientist, sometimes I have the frustration when I work with a business team is they just want the data to support their decision. And when it's not supported, they want us to find some other metrics, basically cherry picking maybe a data set or some metrics to fit in their story. That's very frustrating for us. So now as a business leader for you, I'm sure you also have some frustrations working with data scientists. So can you share with us so data scientists can look at that and then, become better at working with business leaders?
Well, I wouldn't say frustration. I would say maybe some of the challenges prior was more so the type of data that I would look for does not exist, or some of the I think my challenges also were some of the challenges that data scientists or data analysts have to go through is understanding where to get the data, and also the source of the data and how good is the source, right? So I think. We a lot of times business leaders don't dig it as deeper as that, as much as kind of what you mentioned is give me what I want, and so I can put out a good proposal and it supports my cause, and then let's go. But I think I don't know, like maybe this is my own personal sort of appreciation for data and going back to once again, like I started out my career in finance. So there's definitely an analytical side of me that I really appreciate. So I like to dig into the truth as much as I can to the point that it makes sense. So I think the challenge itself is a lot of times that's one component, is that is it really clean enough that I can use? Is it from the right source? The other challenge I think is more so from perhaps some of the data team members that are in a sense, sort of beat down emotionally from the business folks, where they become really reactive, right? So it becomes they essentially just come to me, well, what do you want? Like, what do you like? Just tell me whatever you want in terms of data, in terms of what the project, and then tell me what the timeline, and tell me when you need to buy, and we'll just churn out that data to you, and so I think that in itself. As I mentioned before, like I prefer a more collaborative type of partnership versus a one-way partnership, because it's not going to churn out the best results.
So for data scientists, I always suggest us to be more proactive, go into the business meeting, understand the goals, define the scope of the project with the business leader, so you're solving the right problem. And sometimes I think it's maybe from their perspective, they think that's the best way to help you, but that's also a kind of a lazy way to help, because you're not really engaging in the entire problem solving space, right? So instead of sometimes you don't even know what type of data do I need, right? And then you need to understand what data there is available, how is that measured, what the limitation there, and also think about your business problem. So it really needs to be a conversation, and this conversation needs to be there, as early as possible. Sometimes you already at 50% of your project, and then you realize you're not solving the right problem, and sometimes that's too late, and then both sides would waste a lot of times.
No, I 100% agree with what you said. And if I was able to kind of sum it up, I think this goes not only with data team, but with a lot of other teams that I would talk about is when we have with a business leader coming up with a certain project and trying to validate it, try to pitch it before we actually lay out a plan and execute against it. Teams across need to understand why. And if the teams aren't involved at the early, or they have a, sort of a speak of, having that seat at the table to understand the why, it's really hard to catch up and be motivated and be deeper dive into really the depth of the whys and insights when you're given that project at the, later downstream. And I think that kind of goes back to your point of having that, being involved early on and understand why this project's going on, why this is going a certain way. Why do we select certain channel, or why do we put more resources on certain things? That will also help from the data side of it, is to say, well, this is actually what's available at this point and what's possible, what's not possible, or what kind of data can be, extracted later on.
Yeah. And then, so let's talk about how do you tell a good story with data?
I think from my side of it, I think telling a good story really is, like I mentioned, at a very high level, I think data is a good proxy. I think data is a good starting point of conversation to validate certain points. And from that, we can explain the why and the how we're going to do so. So, I think that's one way of kind of incorporating in my previous experience of pitching new projects. In terms of the overall, storytelling of how data goes into it, I'm a fan of a book called Journey with 1,000 Heroes, I believe. I can give you the correct the correct book title later, but essentially it describes all the historical hero stories, especially from Greek mythology, how those heroes' journey really come to be. And then kind of essentially you can also map out the data sort of curve on that. A lot of times it's starting the hero's journey, right? Start at a certain point, it peaks out, and then it comes with certain challenges, and then what did that person do to kind of overcome those challenges and win at the end of the day. So I think data points from that standpoint of mapping out could play that supportive role, whether it's the peak point or whether it's trough, or how did it going to come about. From business standpoint to growth, the data can play a big part of it.
Yeah. I think I heard of the book. It's probably called The Hero's Journey. And then I have read it in storytelling books. So basically the general idea is start with some challenges you're facing, and then you come out with a solution, and then you solve the challenges, and then you have some sort of happy ending. So when you presented data, you can talk about the challenges you have solved. And especially previously you mentioned use the data to tell the why and how of a problem, why you're doing this, why we're investing in this resource, right? And also sometimes data scientists stop at the scientific finding, the results, the metric. But I think it's also important to suggest, so what? How are you going to make decision with that? Although for data scientists, we're not sales expert, but I think from your perspective, you will be curious to see what's our recommendation, right? Even if we don't know much about sales, but with that recommendation combined with your expertise, and we can come out with the so what together. So it's not like just leaving all the so what, the 100% to you.
Right. No, that's like I mentioned. Yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort. And the insights I think you kind of mentioned previously, the assumptions I have, and also the data points that I think I may need, may not actually be what's needed, or there may be other data points that are needed to support that, to support whatever that cost could be. So that's the part that I would rely on the data team to kind of inform me.
Yeah. That's a great point. And for data scientists, I think sometimes when data scientists just started their career, they're afraid to say no, to tell people, hey, maybe this is not a good question. This is the wrong problem to solve. Trust your intuition, and it's okay to make mistakes, ask questions. And when you have a project, you don't have to just put your head down, work on it on your own from beginning to end. Have some weekly checking with the stakeholders to let them know what's your thought process. And then if you don't think it's a good idea, speak up and tell them. And great leaders like Dennis would actually appreciate that.
No, thank you. I think any good business leader would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit about this later on, but when it comes to soft skills and emotional intelligence,
Oh, yeah,
I think it's important to understand what our limitations are. The fact is, I appreciate data, but I'm not a data scientist. I don't know how to use SQL. I know what it looks like. So it's really to understand the limitations and always surround yourself people that would challenge you with assumptions and challenge your thinking in the right way where, we can all make that project. Like that's one goal. We're all trying to make the project work, right? So,
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think previously you shared with me that you took some data analytics course yourself. Can you tell us about the experience? What made you want to learn that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I have a lot of appreciation for data. I think there's definitely a part of me that retains to be very analytical. So really love to have data to inform my decisions as much as possible. So at that point, I decided that with my experience of working with data team before, I felt like there was a gap when it comes to communication versus it's always, like I mentioned, it's a one-way conversation where I'm asking for certain data and, I'm receiving anything back for what it is, but there's not much sort of in-depth insight. There's not much of that two-way conversation. So I decided, well, in order to kind of what I foresee as communication gap is for me to sort of reach out and cross a little bit to the other side of the bridge to at least understand where the data analytics or the data team is coming from. So I took a Wharton certification course on business analytics, and it's truly just for business leaders who want to understand more about data science and also data analytics. It was great. It was more boot camp course. It was a couple of months of work where we did different projects on whether it's supply chain, on operation. We did case studies, from like Amazon, from Google, from Walmart, different e-commerce companies as well, just using whatever they have. And, we were using Excel spreadsheet to formulate any sort of analytics. But it was definitely more basic level, but I felt like that's kind of what the course was for us to kind of get a little bit more hands-on, but not so in-depth into what data team does day to day. But to develop a little empathy as well, right? To kind of understand where is the data coming from and what are some of the challenges? Why is it certain times that we're not able to extract the kind of data what we need at the right time? So I really enjoyed the course, and I really took upon tried a couple of things that I loved, kind of get a refresher course every year or every couple of years or so. But it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you remember after taking the course, what is something that changed how you work with data or work with data scientists?
I think just more appreciation for it, and not so much a drastic sort of changes to how I work, but more so also just validate like my thinking in terms of what data can do. I think I'm fairly surprised because once again, like I mentioned, I came from the world of physical retail into technology, and I believe everybody talks about everybody's data informed or everybody's data driven decision. But I think truthfully and practically, it's really hard to do. And it's not to say people don't try to practice it, but it's really to understand what the challenges are. Like a lot of times for most companies, data lives everywhere, so data lives everywhere. And that's the biggest challenge. And also the source of the data it's a challenge as well. So to understand that and to understand like the kind of data I will receive and to be used, have to have some certain leniency in terms of whether it's accuracy or whether it's, challenging the assumption of the accuracy of the data. I think it's more the mindset around it and understanding it versus, what I got out of the course and drastically take any sort of, big actions against it.
Yeah. And previously you mentioned that you took the course because sometimes there's some communication gap. So you think it would be easier if you're able to do some deep dive on your own. Can you share some ideas? How can data scientists communicate better with you? How do we fill in that communication gap?
Yeah, I think this is the part, and I don't know, not sure how many people can actually practice it. It's really understanding business context, right? And when it comes to communication, I think a lot of it really comes into understanding where the other side is coming from. And this is the part also when we talk about understanding the why of the project or the why of the direction we're going towards. I think that's going to help a lot from data science, from the data team perspective. As you mentioned, a lot of times the data team is being brought in the latter part in the supporting role where the outcome of the results have sort of been forecasted. And that's really hard to do because at the point, when you're not understanding the why things are coming the way they are or how they're being formulated, you're not being able to communicate effectively or even bring up, as you mentioned prior, any sort of assumption or any other suggestions because you just don't have the full context. So I think it's more so the openness of the communication is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the openness. Yeah, I agree with that. And from a kind of a larger perspective, just a larger umbrella of soft skills, how do you think data scientists can develop soft skills?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And the answer is probably not specific to data scientists. I think it's just for anybody. And soft skills, to kind of give a little bit more philosophical answer, soft skills is fairly wide. So it really includes communication. It can include emotional intelligence. It can include, teamwork, collaboration, adaptation to different environment and situation as well. So I think first and foremost is sort of building an awareness. I think that's more of a personal cultivation and development. Having awareness of yourself as well as other people in a business context, understanding your strength, understanding your weakness, understanding where the other side, the stakeholder is coming from, what the broader context of business is, and what that person's develop a sense to understand what that person's eventual goals are. Right? Because sometimes that person just wants to get the project approved and done. So you understand how you have to come across and the situation it is. And sometimes you do have, people that want to work deeper, understanding, discover different types of insights and perhaps change trajectory. So I think the awareness part is very important to develop that. And, there's definitely courses you can take. There's definitely, I think, there's definitely training courses you can take, but I think a lot of times it starts with communication and understanding people and develop a sense of, asking the right questions. So you, in a way, you can also collect data points from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. What are some courses you mentioned that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I would say like one book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. That's actually, it's a classic book on emotional intelligence. It talks about self-awareness. It talks about awareness with other people. That's a good start.
Yeah. And also previously I interviewed the author of Permission to Feel, Mark Brackett. He's the founding director of Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. So if you're interested in the topic, you can go to that episode called using emotional intelligence to empower your career success.
Yeah.
So going back to the current show, how did you develop your own emotional intelligence besides like reading books?
I think it's for me, it's almost my unique career trajectory has afforded me to develop those types of senses just by the people I come across. So I think, I came from, I immigrated to the U.S. At the early age and moved around into a couple of different neighborhoods and, went to school in Los Angeles, but then later on also lived in Virginia for a couple of years and then moved back to LA. I think the fact that I came across different people, the fact that I came, at a point where my parents actually stay put in Taiwan for majority of the time. I've had to develop some senses of awareness myself, awareness of my own surroundings, and being able to develop a sense of the keenness of the people that I'm interacting with, and also just the openness. I would say just the openness to the people that I come across and different cultures that I come across. That's really helped. And just like anything else, I think there's nothing like practical sort of practice of meeting people. Learning from other people and just being open to those types of experiences.
Yeah. So you moved to the U.S. when you were 13, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I moved from Taiwan at that time.
Uh-huh. And can you share more about how your experience of being an immigrant impact your career? What are some struggles you face and lessons you learned?
Yeah, that's a big question. That's certainly I think there's a lot. So I think inevitably being an immigrant, at the 13. So when I moved here with my mother, my father had stayed behind to take care of business in Taiwan. I moved my mother to a place called Laguna Niguel in Orange County. And for those people that don't know about the area, it's a beautiful area by the beach, right? It's nice, it's sunny, certainly very, monoculture, I would say. The school I went to had 2 Asian students, and I was one of them. And the rest of them were white Caucasians. And so the culture itself was different. And when I first moved here, I didn't speak a word of English. So I was put in a school that did not have the capability or the classes to help people that are learning English as a second language. So I had to just fit in. I was going class to class. Didn't understand what was going on. My best subject was math because as some people know, like Asian kids learn math really early and really fast. I was always the first one to finish the math, and all the kids will look at me with wide eyes and wondering how the heck did I finish that math homework and test so fast. But that situation is fairly unique because like I mentioned, I didn't speak a word of English. What I did was to make sure when I get home every single day, I would go to the library and read a book a day. So that was my way of self-teaching myself the language, along with watching, Disney cartoons, Mickey's, the Ben and Jerry, like that. Those were my real actually English teachers. One fun fact was I remember when I first moved here, my favorite food at that time was hard shell tacos from Taco Bell. So I would go to Taco Bell every single day before I went to the library. Like that was my routine. School, Taco Bell, the library. And so I just did that just over and over again. And I think after a year, not to say at that time like I was fluent in language already, but at least I had a little basic understanding. We quickly realized we're not going to stay around that area for long, so we actually moved up north in Los Angeles to a place called Arcadia. And Arcadia had, the school had a little bit more resources with, for people to teach people with in English as a second language. And so, that's where I grew up. At that point, I think what I learned was the independence of dealing with different types of situations, dealing with different types of people, and how does it feel when you cannot communicate with the other people?
Yeah.
How do you find a sort of a sense of belonging by yourself? So there's definitely, I think for all immigrants perhaps can speak on that as well, is that there's a sense of that resiliency and independence that are being forced to be learned early on.
Yeah.
After Arcadia, I graduated in high school there, went to UC Irvine, also in California, got my econ degree, like I mentioned, went into retail. And the company that hired me was based in Virginia. So they relocated me from Los Angeles to Virginia at that time. And Virginia was another type of what I would call inflection point in my life. The part of Virginia I lived in was more southern part of Virginia. So it was around Virginia Beach. And for those people that know, Virginia was the last state that freed the slaves. For a California boy like myself, that was a big cultural shift.
Yeah.
But at the same, so just imagine going from, now downtown Los Angeles, bunch of fancy restaurants, bars, different places, just everywhere you go, it's so close that you can just drive to a Virginia, a place where bumper stickers and Confederate flags at that time, NASCAR, NASCAR banner schedules, in everybody's house, like right in the front yard. There's a lot of people that came to me and said, well, in this country, they really just believe there's essentially two colors. There's only white and black. Where a Chinese food place has lumpia, has sushi, has everything else. Like that's called the Chinese food. So for me, it was a big cultural shift, but also the opportunity to learn that this is also a big part of America, and to understand what their lives are like. And to understand when they say certain things, that it may not come from a place of hate. It just came from a place of not knowing. And in a sense, sometimes ignorance as well. So that also afforded me to develop, as we were talking about earlier, the emotional intelligence piece. Because it opened me up to something that was completely different than what I'm used to, and to learn what that's like. So after I moved back to LA, obviously started in different industries, being in retail, being in technology companies, being in academia. That's also another phase of my life where I've had to interact with different kinds of people that are working at different process, that are looking for different things, but also extracting the insights from what I learned to really come down to what do humans want at the end of the day. And perhaps that's the sales side of me that I really understand whenever that we are selling something, and when you talk about storytelling, is understanding the other side. What are they really trying to achieve, or what are they trying to gain, at the end of the day, so we can better serve. And that's kind of what I believe from the sales standpoint, or, whether it's merchant success or sales or account management or partnership, is that what can we do to serve the other side? Because usually that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think a lot of time when we think about salespeople, I just feel like, they just want to sell. But good salespeople, I think about what do you need? And then I provide that for you. I help you achieve your goals by giving you the resources.
Right. Yeah, definitely salespeople get a bad rap. I have no question. I have I'm definitely not blinded to that. And I think to your point, just like the way I kind of look at it, there's any other profession, like there's always the people that are doing things for the right reason and doing things that are perhaps not the right reason. And as you mentioned, there's certain salespeople that sell things they're pushing products or services to their clients, to their partners for the sake of just hitting the quota. Those are usually very short term. So I think overall what I can learn, and something that from my career standpoint, I've always sort of built around, is the word relationship. Like would I be asking myself, would I still be able to speak and chat and have a discussion with this person 10 years down the road? When I call this person, will he or she pick up the call?
Yeah.
Right.
So you optimize around building long-term relationship.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of our listeners are immigrants, including myself. And especially early in our career when we just joined the workforce, everybody speak English. And personally, I felt I wasn't confident in speaking up or just ask questions, sometimes just for stupid reasons that, oh, what if my English is not good enough? I have some grammar mistakes. Well, now I still have a lot of grammar mistakes, even if on LinkedIn posts, but I have learned to feel more comfortable to be loud. So what are some of your advice for people having that fear?
First of all, I think you're doing just fine. So second of all, I think the world's changed quite a bit, and I wouldn't say tactically what should a person do in this case. I think for any type of immigrants, it's really to accept who you are. I think it's more of a mental thing than a tactical thing of overcoming perhaps your insecurity or what you think of what insecurity is. I think nowadays, I certainly have my own dose of insecurities, but at this point, when you talk about accent or talking about certain ways, I'm very happy to showcase my sort of Asian American ways. I'm very happy to, and that was one of the reasons why I joined the leadership team for Asian ERG at Shopify, because I know there's power within. The way I kind of look at the way we speak, how we act, the way we celebrate, these holidays we celebrate, what we talk about, it's all uniqueness that we really bring in to different companies we work at. And that's what makes it so great. So I think going back to your question in terms of what can we do on the accent, I think it's more so just shifting the mentality of seeing your accent as a detriment versus just it's your strength. And a lot of times I would say this, in my school, when I got my MBA at USC, my communication professor always said this: when you are doing proposals, like for me at least, I don't care what kind of accent you have, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, or it's Indian, or it's it's Italian. I want to know the content. Can you deliver the content in a concise way? Can you be clear? Can you really support the cause of what you're trying to say? I can really care less about what kind of accent you can have. And I think that was really powerful. In the world we're moving into, I think all those insecurities were built up by the media across the board. And it's getting a little better in America, where we're seeing representations of Asian American leaders. Satya Nadella from Microsoft, he has an accent. Sundar Pichai, he's got an accent. But these are the top CEOs of the world. So I think that gives a lot more visibility and representation of people so-called having the accent could be, versus even back in the days, which, there's there's really rare any immigrants that are in the top of the field.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And while you're leading the talent and professional development for Asian ERG at Shopify, what are something you do to empower people there?
So we just started. I just started taking the role towards the end of last year. There's a lot of exciting stuff that we're trying to do. I think Shopify itself, it's a very inclusive culture. That's something we always, people can actually find this in the public forum as well. It's a very diverse and inclusive environment, and I was excited, as I mentioned before. It's a passion of mine to really showcase what Asian American or Asian Canadian communities could be or are. I think Shopify cultivates that space, the freedom for our employees to do certain things because they also recognize the power of it. And what we're looking to do going forward, because the ERG organization is still fairly young. I believe it's only about 2-3 years old, so it's not that old. Some of the things we've done prior, where we've done fireside chats, we've done some celebrations of for example, Lunar New Year, and we've done a lot of uplifting events. We definitely offer a space for the employees to come together to talk about any sort of natural disasters or events within their own countries. And it's grown quite a bit. Before, I believe that the organization was only, there was just one Asian organization, but right now we've been broken up into South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, just to make sure that we can cover everyone with their own sort of unique needs. Going forward, some of the things that we're talking about, I think Fireside Chat is going to be there, where we're going to interview, some of the senior leaders within Shopify, to talk about their careers, their journeys as well. Hopefully, we can also build out some of the mentorship program along with that. But I think that's very important in the sense that, taking a page out of what Hollywood's currently doing. From the years ago when you had the Crazy Rich Asian to like Shang-Chi movie last year, I think it's really, really rallied people around, wow, I've seen these people that look like me. But I never could envision myself in those types of roles, but I see how successful they are. Now it gives me hope. So that's also what we're trying to achieve in the Fireside Chat, is to showcase and also show some of the senior leaders that are within the Asian community and what that looks like, and also what kind of journey and path they've been on and what kind of challenges they came through. So we can build that sort of safe space for the people, but at the same time, have some kind of aspirational aspect of it for the community. And I think so. Aside from that, I think we're also looking into some of the external partnerships currently as well with other Asian diaspora organizations that are doing some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. And now, for your own career, what are some mistakes you have made?
Oh boy, I've made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes I think I'm just blinded by it, that not knowing that those are mistakes. I think one big part, instead of something very specific, I think early on in my career, my ego had gone in my way. Most of the time, my ego became a sort of decision-making tool on what I want to do and how I want to do things. So, whether it's within an organization, well, even given an example that early on in my career, I started my own company. There would be a lot of times where, I deal with vendors or deal with partners in a sense that, not so-called data-driven, but more so ego-driven, emotionally driven, that perhaps have gone out of the way that I expected. And there's definitely some relationships that I wish that have gone better. And also because of the decision sort of, the source of decision and the way I made that decision.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And if you are to mentor people early in their career, what's your best advice for them?
I think it's very important now, especially because I was working at USC for 2 years. I had the opportunity to look at our education system and to look at how the younger folks or the kids are actually learning. I think what's lacking in the traditional education system is, one, like life skills and soft skills, as you mentioned. Life skills, soft skills, and also the other thing that I think is really important is learning how to learn. And I think if I had learned that very early on in my career, and knowing that the current state of society and also the future economy is based on information, and how much information, the quantity is no longer the issue, but more so for people to understand what to learn and when to know or learn that information is more and more important. And I don't think the kids and also the younger generation have that capability to do that in their day-to-day, having a mental model. But I think it's very important to do that. So that's always something that I have, sort of preach and also advise the students when I was at USC is you have to learn what to learn. You can't just intake all the content, all the information, treat your brain the way that you would treat your body, as if you wouldn't just take any sort of snacks and any food and ingest at any time, right? You have to be careful about it. You have to ration it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With the development of data science and now machine learning and AI, how do you see data empower sales process in the future?
Yeah, so you have some pretty cool tools right now, right, that are really helping the sales organization. You have, for example, Gong, which is a tool that records all the sales calls, and it uses the AI and machine learning to understand what the call is about and what at what interval was the subject or topics talked about, what the emotions are and what the pauses and just the technicality of it. I think that's one great example of where the field is going when it comes to helping sales organization. I think there's definitely some stuff, as we mentioned before, sales organizations are usually pretty big in SaaS organizations because we still need a human element. But there's no question that I can see there's some automations that can be done, more and more for right now it's being in a supportive role, but there's no question in my mind, like going forward, it could replace some of the more basic functions when it comes to it within the sales roles. As we gather more data, as we gather more understanding of what the needs are within that the customer touch point within the sales cycle, and we use those, we can extract those data points from tools like Gong and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. And what is something you're excited about in your life and career right now?
Yeah. Since this is really the first week of 2022, I feel like everything's pretty exciting right now. So I think it's a good way. I think right now I'm in a good place. I love the place I work, the company I work for. We have a great vision. We have a great team. There's still a lot of exciting growth. I think on the other side too, very excited about the Asian ERG initiative. And I wish to do a little bit more for that community as well. I'm actually, looking to actually launch a podcast as well.
Nice.
But just sort of showcasing the stories, as I mentioned, on, sort of tech or e-commerce leaders that are from underrepresented communities. Yeah. So whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's, sexual orientation. And I think these stories are very, very powerful and very, very relatable. Going back to, my days as I got my master's, I remember studying all these case studies. We studied people like Howard Schultz from Starbucks, Jack Welch from GE. I mean, these are all fantastic leaders in their own right. But I always ask myself, like, do I have the same journey and experience as they do? Not really, pretty far off, actually. I always wish, how come we didn't study anyone that actually looked like me, that felt like me, that sounded like me, or had the same experience, but was also very successful. I think that to me is very exciting in terms of having to share that sort of wealth and connectivity with other people and bring the community together. Like that to me is, there's a lot of power within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So for listeners who want to follow your journey, maybe your podcast or reach out to you, how can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, I think right now the easiest way is probably on my LinkedIn. So you can just search Dennis Yu or just type in Dennis Yu Shopify because I believe there's quite a few Dennis Yus out there. As a matter of fact, I get wrong emails all the time. So yeah, Dennis Yu Shopify on the LinkedIn, you'll find me there. Mm-hmm. And my podcast haven't officially launched yet, but it's going to be called Great Minds Think Differently. And that would obviously, yeah. So that would be on Apple and Spotify, obviously.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing your experience and your advice for data scientists and specifically teach us a little bit about sales cycle. Very excited to learn more about your podcast and catch up with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really fun.